name is Sarah Clark, and I am moderating this panel about it's about Dragonring. I'm going to read the title. Read the title. This is Reviving the Cult Classic with Cullen Bunn and the relaunch of Dragonring. This is an Outland Entertainment publication project, and everybody here is affiliated with that project. I am with the marketing team, and I'm going to let everybody else introduce themselves, starting with Jeremy to my right.
I'm Jeremy Mohler. I'm the owner and founder of Outland Entertainment.
I'm Shannon Potratz. I'm the artist of Dragonring.
My name is Christopher Helton, and I am the game director for Outland Entertainment.
Cullen.
Is it me?
Yes.
And I'm Cullen Bunn. I'm writing Dragonring.
Great, thank you. So first of all, for those of you who aren't familiar with Dragonring, we're going to ask Chris Helton to kind of give us a background on it. So Chris, go ahead and take it away.
In the early 80s, a Canadian comic publisher called Aircel Comics launched a handful of titles that were written and or created by a writer and artist and editor named Barry Blair. They brought, they were unique for the time because they brought a anime sensibility to comics that wasn't yet popular in American comics. And they covered a number of different genres. A lot of them were mashups. A lot of, a little bit of science fiction, a little bit of magic, a little bit of high fantasy. But it was a lot of stuff that really wasn't being seen in American comic book markets at the time.
Cool. Okay, so Cullen, you are the writer, and from conversations I've had with the team, this was your idea. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your experience with the Dragonring series and affiliated titles, and how you brought it to us for this?
Yeah, Dragonring has been a book that's been kind of important to me for a long time. I was reading it when it was first published by Aircel all those years ago, and I remember where I was sitting when I first read that first issue. And it's one of the indie books that, for a guy who had mostly read Marvel and DC with a few outline things up at that point, it really opened my eyes to what a comic to what other kinds of stories comics can tell. And I like many of the Aircel books, but Dragonring was always the one that was my favorite. And I think I this all came about probably was I started posting about Dragonring on Twitter or something years ago and saying, hey, whoever owns Dragonring these days, here I am, it's time to revise it. And eventually that led to Jeremy and I talking about the Aircel books in general, and doing something new with Dragonring. Something that is true to what Dragonring was as a comic, but it's kind of a new version and a new iteration of that title.
Great. So you actually started with the Warlock 5 title, correct?
Yeah, that was another one of those titles that was really important to me at that time as well. Both of those books, and to the point that I've had them, I had my print editions of the comics custom bound into hardcovers because I like them so much. And then of course Jeremy released a beautiful hardcover edition of Warlock 5 anyway. So what a pointless act that was. Thanks, Jeremy.
I do what I can.
So I have that. I have that as well because Warlock 5 is a great comic, and those really were the two that I hold up pretty high. I love both those books quite a bit above all those other books I was reading at the time.
So, Jeremy, from the Outland perspective, what did this process look like, and why is it so perfect for Outland and our overall vision?
So a lot of what we focus on is transmedia. A lot of what we focus on is transmedia, and having an opportunity to kind of bring these titles back out and then create a universe around them, which is pretty much what Cullen pitched, is an Outland universe featuring a number of the Aircell titles that we acquired. So we're looking at really pushing, starting with the comics and then pushing it into games, right? We're going to probably push into games with these, I think, and then whatever else we can do.
So back to Cullen, I'm really curious about this, and maybe this is one of those self-indulgent questions, but what is it like being so connected to these titles and these books, and then being responsible for writing them also? Like, what is that like for you?
Well, you know, it's interesting because being a person, I love comics growing up, and all throughout my life, I love comics.
Yeah, I was
And
gonna
I had
say,
the opportunity.
I was gonna say you don't love them now.
I still like it. No, I still love comics. But I've been lucky enough to have the opportunity to work on a lot of titles that have meant something to me. So X-Men, for instance, is a book that meant a lot to me when I was a kid. So I had the opportunity to write them the X-Men, and that's awesome. And Micronauts was a book that I loved as a kid, and I had the opportunity to write Micronauts. This is a little different, though. I'm grateful for the opportunity to write these books, but where it's different is this is much more of a creator-owned field than working on X-Men or Micronauts. This is it has the potential to be really gratifying if we pull this off, because we are looking at some very ambitious storytelling going forward on this. But it's interesting because I love these books. It is no exaggeration to say these books are part of the reason I'm a writer today. And having the opportunity to work on them and really have a little more control over those titles. I love writing Micronauts, but that's a Hasbro property. And Hasbro had the final say, and I love writing X-Men, but Marvel's going to have the final say on that, including up to when my time on those books is done. And this is much more in the weeds. It's much more getting into it right through formula and really building this in design.
What's also kind of interesting too is that, and different from a lot of big comics. Well, number one, you're more or less partnered with us, so you have creative control on this,
right?
To take it where you want. Secondly, you're writing all the books that we're going to relaunch initially with all of this, which would be Samurai, Elf Lord, Gun Fury, and Demon Hunter, in addition to Dragon Force eventually. And you're writing all of it, so you've got control of how that world, how this multiverse comes together, which I don't know that I've ever seen a comic event written and orchestrated by one mastermind. Are you a mastermind?
Yeah, I just realized I don't have time to be here. I gotta go.
Yeah, we gave you a lot of work to do.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, the fun thing about this is we're kicking it off with Dragonring. And those first few pages of Dragonring, the first issue, you'll get a feel how this is all going to come together pretty quickly. But then we have Elf Lord, Samurai, Gun Fury, and Demon Hunter. And all of those take place in different worlds. And we're going to bring those all together at some point. And then there's a book down the line called Dragon Force, which you could probably, it's probably pretty easy to piece together what Dragon Force will represent. And then I have even bigger plans that Jeremy, I think, cringes every time I bring them up. I'm not bringing them up in the family.
I like seeing them cringe.
I don't think we want to see Jeremy cringe that much just yet.
So can you give us just a basic idea of what College, can you give us a basic idea of what Dragonring is and how what you're doing with it?
So Dragonring has always been a supernatural pulp adventure. And if you look at the original Dragonring stories, they started out, it was sort of Indiana Jones style pulp adventure, lots of martial arts, and then supernatural sort of elder cosmic horror, all mixed together. And that's what we're doing with this new version. Now, we are not taking up a lot of track of what the old version was. We're not erasing the old version, but this is a new version of Dragonring in that we have a new lead character who has a connection to the previous lead character, but it's still martial arts, cosmic horror, pulp adventure. Lots of globe trotting and lots of craziness. Lots of monsters getting kung fu kicked right in the face.
That sounds fun. Speaking of monsters, Shannon, the next question is for you. So I want to set this up a little bit. So Cullen grew up with these comics and he's very probably nostalgic about them, and so he treats them with a certain respect. But you are new to these comics. You did your research, but they're new. So can you tell us a little bit about your responsibility? Your responsibility, making sure you honor that nostalgia, and then also bringing it to a new audience.
And one note to make is that Shannon is actually doing all of the art on the book as well as lettering the book. So he's doing the pencils and the colors and the lettering. So he's multi-talented.
Thank you. I was only vaguely familiar with the Airsoft and Very Rare titles growing up. I didn't really find out about them until probably the early 90s. But at the time, one of my favorite artists that came along working on Incredible Hulk with Dale Keown, and I had kind of traced back some of his earlier work to Dragon. So it's kind of exciting to be part of, for lack of a better term, part of kind of a legacy there in history with this comic. And it's important to me to kind of dive into that mythology because I feel like the more I know about that title, the more I can bring to it. And then, so I actually went on eBay and found the original floppies for like $1 a piece and bought them and sat down one night and read them. So it's pretty exciting to jump into an old indie title and make something new out of it. So I'm really honored to be working on this.
So I want to point out that Outland does own these comics, and we have them available digitally. And Jeremy, can you kind of talk about how they can access these?
Yeah, you can get most of the books. I haven't quite got them all up, but we acquired the Barry Blair Library back in, we started talking like 2018.
Feels like forever.
It does. Thanks. Anyway, I acquired it, and we've been slowly retouching all of the books and putting them back up on Comixology and through our website, outlandentertainment.com. And so that's where you're going to find the old books. I haven't made a decision yet whether or not we're going to reprint anything. I would rather, I think, move forward with the new stuff, print-wise. I don't know. Cullen might have an opinion on that, but I'm not sure.
I've already got my hardcover. I don't know.
So, Chris, as somebody else who is very familiar with these books, I'm curious, what is your response to this revival of the cult classic?
It's very exciting because it's good to see all of this being reinterpreted through a new lens. There were some really interesting ideas in the book, and not everything aged as well as others. So it's good to see the good parts of it come out. There was one thing I was going to ask too, Cullen. What do you think that Barry would think of all of this with, his books coming back and the excitement of creators like you wanting to play in his world?
I have no way of knowing. I mean, Barry Blair was not a creator that I ever, he passed away, I don't know how many years ago.
Like that.
Okay. I never really met him. He had already passed before I was really doing a lot of work professionally anyway. From a creator-owned standpoint, it's always interesting because as if it were something that I created, it's exciting to see a new interpretation and see the book, see those stories go in another direction. But you always look at it with a little bit of you clench up a little bit as it was going along because you never know what's going to happen. And these are very, these interpretations of these stories are very different in a lot of ways from what came before. The general concept is there. It's a different sensibility in storytelling, a different sensibility in the art. And Dragonring, for instance, it had a great start, it's a book I love dearly. It can be the original run was a bit of a mess. Because there are times when I don't even know what's happening. And we're trying to take the mythology, that nugget of mythology, and actually build it into something that makes sense and is relevant and works for today's readers.
Great. So Shannon, in front of you have a copy of the preview, and which, by the way, we have signed copies if anybody wants one. Cullen hasn't seen it, but Shannon has, and it is Shannon's artwork. So I would love to hear your response. You just saw it for the first time this week. How did that make you feel to see your work in print?
I was pretty tickled to see it in print. I don't know how many times I flipped through it in the hotel room last night, just read through it over and over again. It's pretty exciting to see it in print.
Apparently he fell asleep clenching
Yeah, but it's pretty cool. It's different seeing it on the monitor when I'm working on it. Everything looks so big, and all the stuff that kind of bothers me about it is what stares me in the face. When I see it in print and I see it reduced down to what an actual comic is supposed to be like and how you're supposed to read a comic book, it's a completely different. I look at it in a completely new way, and it's pretty neat.
So Shannon, you had mentioned, you were talking about one of the characters, how Cullen had given you a description of the character, and then you kind of had a back and forth conversation about developing that. Would you mind sharing that with us now? I thought it was an interesting. I love to know how things work, especially between comic writers and artists.
Well, Cullen, you had a description. He had a description for the character as somebody. She's tough and she can handle herself. She's not. She's basically a badass, and then she works as a bartender. And so, my first thought was, somebody very close to me. Her name is Jen, and she has the red hair with kind of a mohawk and square ear gauges. And that just seemed like an appropriate direction for her visually. So that's where I looked at the character.
And then there was another instance with the two-faced monster.
That was what was fun about that is the description on that was just the two-headed monster with one kind of this kabuki mask look to it. And so, the fun of this is I get kind of just this general description from Cullen, but I can kind of run with it a little bit, and kind of play around with it as we got in. It sort of takes on a life of its own. We start drawing it on paper, and being able to do things like having a whole jaw, whole face open up, you know, and you just become this monstrosity when it leaps into action. It's fun to have that freedom to kind of play around with the designs a little bit, to bring my own kind of unique style to it, I suppose.
And Cullen, I'd be interested to hear your side of that. I mean, you give him your idea, and I'm sure you have some sort of picture in your head, and then he sends you something. Like, what is that experience like?
Yeah, it's the thing that any creator needs to keep in mind in comics, especially, it's a collaborative medium. And I could have gone in and written pages of what I thought this monster could have looked like, and I could have drawn my own little pencil sketches of what it should look like. But how's that fun for Shannon? And if Shannon's not having fun drawing it, then it's all for naught anyway. So my goal is to give enough description that we understand the mood, and we understand sort of what we're trying to do, what the creature would look like in terms of the logistics of the story. But part of the fun and excitement for me is seeing what Shannon comes up with. And Kara, the main character, she does not look how I envisioned her when I originally wrote the script. But I think it's a better design than what I had in my mind. That this is the right design for that character. The two-headed monster, I was so excited when I saw it for the first time. It was just perfect. It was so, again, probably better than what I had in mind at the beginning. And that's really part of the fun of comics. And it's a big part of what keeps me working in comics. Is there's that instant gratification for me. I mean, it's a very quick turnaround on arts, on these monster designs compared to a lot of other publishing endeavors. And I get to, I write a script, and in short order, here I start seeing these characters and these monsters coming to life, and that's all makes it thrill. I mean, it's hard to beat the thrill you get, that I as a writer get from that, seeing that art in any other sort of medium of writing, medium. You don't get that in prose. You don't get it, when I write a movie, a screenplay. You don't see that right away or ever. So comics have that sort of instant turnaround and that more immediate gratification for me, and it's exciting. It's one of the things I love most about it.
That's cool. I can imagine it's kind of like reading a comic that you wrote, but like it's still a new comic to you in a way. So that's a neat experience.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I can't read one of my scripts. I don't read my scripts once I write them and proof them and the final version. I don't ever want to see another one of my scripts. I don't ever want to read one of my scripts. But I'll reread the comic. I'll look at the comic over time and go back to that.
We have a little bit of time, so if there are any questions from the audience, yes, you, sir.
Cullen, can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, I've got a question for you. As an up-and-coming comic author, just starting to dip my toes in there with a small up-and-coming indie publisher. So I have yet to encounter any creative differences between myself and my artist, but I'm curious how you maybe carefully tiptoe around situations like that and try to find that happy medium ground.
So I feel as though I've been very fortunate over just, I've been working full time in comics over 10 years now, and, doing it as my side hustle for several years before that. And I feel very fortunate that I haven't had like really bad creative differences with one of the people I've worked with. I've worked with folks who are real professionals, and when something does come up that may not work for me on the page, it usually gets worked out, pretty quickly. What you'll find is if you continue to work with certain creators over time, those are the people you argue and butt heads with the most. So if you look at, I worked with the artist Brian Burke, he's the first person that I worked with to do a comic together called The Dam. And we've worked with Punk Comics for, ever since, working on new stuff now. And we absolutely butt heads on what we're going to be doing together. And, Brian has no problem saying to me, I don't want to draw that. And I have no problem. And I have no problem saying to him, well, you're gonna. Or we figured out. And I feel like, I worked in marketing for so many years before I started doing comics professionally. And I feel like I took some skills from that job in terms of we were always working out problems, always dealing with differences, and always recognized as a team. And I feel like that's helped me over the years. I have not had any major issues with an artist that can't be figured out pretty quickly. And now that might not be an artist. Shannon might say that that's not the case in his experience working with me, that I'm awful. But, and other artists might say that. But I feel like I've always had a pretty good working relationship with him. I feel like if you're not going to, you're going to realize it real quickly, and then get out of it quick. Run for the hills if you start noticing real problems.
Well, so far so good right here.
Yeah, all right. We'll take that.
So Jeremy is also an artist in addition to being Outland. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Well, I think there's also a difference too between working on a creative endeavor with more or less a partner or a creative partner versus working, on stuff that's like work for hire or it's somebody paying you to do work. Because let's be honest, comics don't always pay. But that being said, I've seen more creative differences when we're hiring to work with people and it's not something they're so involved in. Like I think in this case, Shannon has a lot of creative input in the project. In a lot of ways, it's his creative vision as well, melded with Cullen's writing. So you're forming the visual aesthetic for the book, and you've got a lot of control on that, and that gives you a lot of incentive to work on things and make it work. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's the way I describe it typically is it's a level of engagement, and when any one of the people involved in the comic are not engaged, you can tell right away. It's obvious when someone's just not into it, and it shows in the final product. But when everybody's really engaged, those problems that that you can kind of envision possibly happening, they don't come anywhere near as problematic. Everybody wants this to be successful. They want it to be as good of a book as it can be.
So from the artist perspective, Shannon and Jeremy both, have you had that experience where a writer was either not giving clear direction, or when you produced something that you felt like was in line with what they wanted, it didn't turn out that way? Like, what advice would you give our young comic endeavor?
Also name names.
What's that?
Name names. Who are they?
I couldn't name any names off the top of my head, but I've had situations where I wasn't clicking with the person giving the direction and the writing. I sort of felt like I was giving them what they were describing, but then they were coming back with it was like new ideas every time they came back with something, and so eventually haven't been very many instances I can think of where we didn't finally get to where we wanted to be, but sometimes the process is a little more painful than others.
I think sometimes it depends on the person's ability to describe what they want.
Right.
I recently had an author working on the cover for a book, and I went back and forth with this gentleman like 4 or 5 times, and I could not get him to give me physical descriptions of the main characters. He just gave me bits and pieces. I finally had to go on the phone and talk to him. Once we talked, it was really easy to pull it out. So sometimes it's just a matter of figuring out the communication. So, anyway.
Well, thank you for that question. Are there any other questions from the audience? Oh, yeah, yes, sir.
Well, getting back to the variant player stuff and Dragonring, Cullen, I know your career on stuff you've done like Six Gun and Harrow County. You've always done a lot of very in-depth world building, aesthetic and the hallmark of your stuff. How would you compare the worlds that you've built before to what you're hoping to do scale-wise and scope with variant player stuff?
Yeah, so I feel like it's a lot of the same thing. You know,
Uh-oh.
Just a minute, we lost one.
So Jeremy, just to wrap things up, so as mentioned before, Outland does own this, but we're also looking at getting licensing for similar types of things, beloved IPs and opportunities for us to expand on these worlds that people love that have been created into transmedia. So do you want to talk a little bit about what you're looking for as far as licensing goes?
Right now, in terms of licensing, we're looking for books, mostly prose stories that we can then take and turn into comics or games. And games involve role-playing games as well as board games. We haven't quite cracked the market on video games yet, but one of these days.
We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. Okay, so that's it. Does anybody have anything to add that maybe they felt like? No? Good. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming out. We appreciate it. And be sure to stop by our booth. It's almost over tonight, but tomorrow pick up your free copy of the preview for Dragonring right now. You can buy Warlock 5 Omnibus, which is the old stuff, or Warlock 5 The Return, which is the new stuff that Cullen's writing. And then you can also follow the Kickstarter for Dragonring on Kickstarter. And you can scan here for that. So thank you everybody for coming. Have a nice evening.